Hi friends, we at GLC would like to take a quick moment to thank you for watching our programs on this platform, and we'd like to ask you for a little favor. Would you please go beneath this video and click the subscribe button? Did you know that by simply subscribing to the GLC YouTube channel, you can help us financially support the programs on this platform? You'll need to be signed into YouTube beforehand, but if not, simply click the subscribe button and YouTube will automatically walk you through the steps to sign in or to create an account. By taking these simple steps, you will not only ensure that you continue to receive our unique programming and gain instant access to the hundreds of videos we post, but more importantly, you'll also be telling YouTube that GLC's content is worth watching and promoting. Likewise, if you enjoyed a specific program, please click the thumbs up button below, which also helps inform YouTube that this is a program worth recommending. Finally, once you have logged in and subscribed, please click the notification bell below in order to receive announcements when we post new content. As usual, feel free to post your questions and comments in the comments section below. We always love hearing from our friends and viewers. Again, thank you for watching and supporting God's Learning Channel. We couldn't spread the message of the gospel without you. Be blessed, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Shalom once again. Welcome back to In My Flesh I See God, where we have been showing how the design of the Hebrew language, which created all things in the universe, in the beginning God said, and there were beasts in the field and so forth, happens to be the design we see within the structure of all the things that we see in the universe. So the Hebrew language is designed, once again, and when we look inside the things that is designed, what do we see? The Hebrew language. That's the point of it. And that's one of the reasons why I believe the Father is sovereignly chosen in these days to turn back to the peoples the pure language. It's not as if, it's God's way of saying, I'm going to give you so much evidence, and I'm going to show it to you so consistently that you cannot deny me. A last-ditch effort, if you will, by the Father to bring all those who were ordained by Him from the very beginning back into His house. Now, we were talking when we left off last time about how genetics work and the information in the gene and so forth gives the function to the cell and so forth. And one of the words that was used in these science books is the word recipe, that the gene contains the recipe for making protein molecules. Protein molecules, once again, are those things that are going to begin to separate hair cells from skin cells and nerve cells and so on and so forth. So the genes contain that information. Now remember, gene is the G and the N. The gon, if you will, that is the Hebrew word for garden, where all things begin, and it happens to be the two letters in English that generally speak of all words that have something to do with beginning. Coincidence? Not a kosher word, as I've said many times. Now, we were talking about the word takan. Takan is the Hebrew word for recipe. Now, takan happens to be a word in Hebrew that means a measurement of sort, how you measure something. So it's a measuring stick and so forth. As a matter of fact, let's go to the board here real quickly, and I'll write it up here for you on the board. The word takan is T-A-K-A-N. Now, this is the word we're talking about. This word takan means, now come on back to me, means a recipe in modern Hebrew and in a modern culture. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because recipe, the concept of a recipe, is the better way to see how this word is used in measuring things. Because you see, it's also the word that's used to describe what's called the takanote of the Pharisees and the takanote of the Sadducees. You may have heard that term before. And it means the measurements of the Pharisees and the measurements of the Sadducees. I'm going to submit to you that they had their own recipes for what the Torah was. And because that's the whole concept of a recipe. And if you don't mind, humor me for a minute, and let me give you a true story here to help you understand why Yeshua and why Paul were constantly railing against the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Why? Because they weren't teaching the Torah. They had added to the commandments of God, and they had taken away from the commandments of God, and they set up these requirements for Gentiles to come into the kingdom through their system. And that's what Paul and Yeshua were constantly standing against, because they had added to the Torah. So in other words, they were saying the word Torah, but they had added to it and taken away from it. The best way to describe that is a recipe. Now, many years ago, when I first started doing what I do now, the host used to call my wife and say, what is Brad like and what is he not like? He's coming to our town and he's speaking and so forth. And does he like, fat pillows? Does he like skinny pillows? Does he like strong coffee, weak coffee, things like that? And Carol used to say, she doesn't say it anymore primarily, I think, because of this little story here, but she said to one a long time ago, as a matter of fact, it was in Wichita, Kansas, that if you really want to please Brad, make him cornbread. Brad loves cornbread. And so the reason she said that is because when I was young, when I was raised up, my mother made the best cornbread on the planet. And what we used to do is we used to have one meal a week where we would have a glass of milk, and she would bake this cornbread, and you put the cornbread in the milk, and you'd spoon the cornbread out of the glass. And we loved that. I loved it. It was wonderful. And so that's the reason why she said, if you want to please Brad, make him cornbread because he loves cornbread. Well, so I get to the seminar or whatever, and I teach all that night, and I come in very late at night, and I'm sitting at the counter, and the host turns around with a whole tray of cornbread. And I looked at it and went, how did you know? Oh my goodness, I was shocked. I said, how did you know I love cornbread? And of course they said, well, the congregation and us got together and we prayed and so forth. And the Father revealed, no, that's not how it happened. But anyway, so I said, I can't believe that you made this cornbread for me. And I started to take my fork and dip it into the cornbread. And I went, I love cornbread. Let me tell you how much I love cornbread. And I was eating the cornbread. I said, I really love cornbread. Okay. Well, it was terrible. Okay. Now, that's an abrupt end of the story, but the point of the story was this. These people were calling it cornbread, but that was not my mama's cornbread. That was not my mama's cornbread, even though they were calling it cornbread. See, they had added something to the recipe, or they took something away from the recipe, and they were saying cornbread, but that was not my mama's cornbread. My point is that the Pharisees and the Sadducees were saying it was the Torah, but they had added things to it and taken things from it. Now, once again, if you do that to the Word of God that we just mentioned at the Y-Star Symposium, quote, last times, if you add something to the words, you invariably change and corrupt its meaning in the same way that if you start manipulating these letters that are written on your DNA in the language, you accomplish the same thing. Let me switch this up real quick back to where we're at. So the same thing, in other words, the same thing that happens in your genetic structure is the same thing that happens in words and language as well. Why? Because this language created all things. And so naturally, if we believe that, then when we look within us, we will see the same structure going on inside of us, and we're beginning to understand that. We also, for instance, know that there is a protein in our bodies called laminin. Now, perhaps some of you have seen this on YouTube. There's a gentleman, I don't remember his name, that does a wonderful job of setting this up. There's music in the background, and he has a great appreciation for the creation and God's discovery, and discovering all these things that God created and how it relates to the natural things in our universe, and showing the validity of the Scriptures. And he does a wonderful job. And then he starts describing this protein called laminin that holds all things. Is the protein that holds things together and supports all the parts of the body. It's called laminin within us and so forth. And then as he does this, in the background comes a graphic representation of laminin. And David, if you can bring that up right now. He has a different one, but this is the one that I've used for a long time. And as you can see, when this thing comes across in this huge theater in the background, and people see that it's a cross, then as you can imagine, everybody gets the oohs and ahs and so forth from this. Now, this is something I've been using for a while, but it's a graphic representation of what's called laminin. In other words, the artists have put it together because it kind of looks like a cross. But actually, this is what it actually looks like. This is a photograph of what laminin actually looks like. And you'll see as you trace laminin through the various photos that we have of it, they're all look kind of like an X and so forth. And of course, naturally, as you stand that up, it would look somewhat like a cross. But the way I've been displaying it for a long time now is that it's actually the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, called the Tav. As a matter of fact, let me bear with me here as I go forward real quickly to show you. There's what chromosomes look like. See, chromosomes also look like a Tav. And as you can see from one of these ancient Hebrew charts, that down at the bottom, as it takes its progression up to the top, it starts to form what we call the traditional view of what a cross looks like. But in its ancient form down at the bottom, that is actually what laminin looks like. Laminin actually looks like what you see down there at the bottom. The reason I bring that up is because the Tav is the Hebrew word or Hebrew letter that means a sign. One of the meanings of the Tav is, ancient picture, is two crossed sticks. And it's the Hebrew letter of the sign. Some of you are familiar with the teaching. I believe I've even done this on GLC before, on the meaning of the Aleph Tav in Scripture. Because if you look at an Aleph and you look at a Tav, especially as they're formed in ancient pictographs, both of them have something that looks much like a chromosome. The modern Aleph looks more like a chromosome than the ancient one does, but the ancient Tav looks exactly like a chromosome. Now remember, in our bodies, these chromosomes in a male and a female are what determines, in other words, is the number of chromosomes and the way they're sent down to it that's going to determine whether we're male and female or not. In a typical cell of a human being, there are 46 chromosomes. Let me put back the actual shot of it. There are 46 chromosomes, except in the sperm cell of a man and the egg cell of a woman. In that case, there are 23 chromosomes. Come on back to me for a minute, David. In the egg cell of a woman is 23 chromosomes, and the sperm cell of a man is 23 chromosomes. So it takes 46 chromosomes to have life. And remember, these chromosomes are in the shape of the Aleph and the Tav in Hebrew, because the Aleph and the Tav are the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which created life. It also, not by coincidence, happens to be one of the representations of Yahweh Himself. He is called in Hebrew the Aleph Tav, in Greek the Alpha and Omega, in the English the beginning, the end, and the first and the last, because of the first and last letters of the alphabet, which created all things. So in Hebrew, when we say Aleph Tav, or even sometimes Aleph Bet, when we say that, we mean all the letters, all 22 letters of the alphabet. And so now when we look inside the chromosome of the males, in the male sperm cell, we see 22 autosomes and one sex chromosome. That's how it works. We see 22 autosomes, what's called autosomes, and one sex chromosome. Now notice once again, 22. And when we look inside the female, we also see egg cell, we see 22 autosomes and one sex chromosome. And these things are based upon this language. So I'm going to submit to you. And the reason why I bring this up is because there's a lot of criticisms of this laminin. If you get on some of the blogs and so forth on the internet and so forth, you're going to see a lot of criticism, because here come the unbelievers, here come the Darwinists and so forth, attacking this laminin teaching that this guy does, okay? Which once again is in reality the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And the reason why I want to highlight this is because one of the criticisms, and this is a real criticism, one of the main ones, and that is this, that these, once again, believers, and these Bible-thumping believers Don't know what they're talking about, because that laminin couldn't possibly be a cross, because laminin, now this is a belief, and people have been around for billions of years. Laminin has been around for billions of years when the cross just came around in the time of Jesus. I'm just quoting them. And so it couldn't possibly be a cross, because laminin's been around billions of years before the cross, and so forth. Well, two things about that. Number one, we haven't been around for billions of years. That's the first part of it. And this cross, if you will, comes from the Hebrew Aleph Tav, the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which has been around for thousands of years. Long before the concept of a cross, we had this last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which created everything in the universe. And so that would be my answer to that particular person, that comes from the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Now, we had talked earlier about these 4 letters that are written on our DNA, the A, C, T, and G. Now, these are 4 chemical properties that have names to them. Some people have thought, as a matter of fact, I've even received some books saying that they believe that these 4 letters written on our DNA are Yod, He, Vav, He. Well, no, it couldn't be Yod, He, Vav, He, because in Yod, He, Vav, He, 2 of the letters are the same. And these are 4 different chemical properties. So I don't believe it's talking about Yod, He, Vav, He. Now, what some people have asked me, what do you think is the meaning of those 4 letters? This is my opinion. I'm not going to teach this now, but this is my opinion. Because of the concept of these 4 things, meaning a full, complete understanding of something, is Peshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod. Now, that's my opinion, but I'm not going to get into that right now. What I want to do is show you that these 4 letters, that these scientists specifically chose these terms to describe what was functioning, what was happening on the DNA, and what they saw as well. And I believe they deliberately chose these things. As a matter of fact, you'll find out that a lot of times scientists and those in the medical fields will choose Latin terms or Greek words to describe things that they see. It's just because of the nature and dynamics of those 2 languages and so forth. It doesn't seem to work real well with the English and so forth. So they take Greek and Latin terms. And those 4 words, I think I said earlier, are guanine, cytosine, thymine, and adenine. And those are the 4 letters that are written there. Now, let's start with the first one. The ine part of it, guanine, is G-U-A-N-I-N-E. Okay, as a matter of fact, go ahead, David, go ahead and put it up there. Even though you're kind of looking at my notes here, we'll just put it up there. The 4-letter alphabet, guanine, cytosine, adenine, and thymine. Guanine, the I-N-E parts, as you see there because each word ends with an I-N-E. That just is a Latin term that means pertaining to. That's all that means, is pertaining to. So it's just a suffix that means pertaining to what? Guan. And the first parts, the first 4 letters is what we want to focus on. And once again, primarily what we see duplicated is the consonants in Hebrew. The first one they chose to call in something fundamental that they saw, which is the beginning. In other words, the scientists are looking at this and they understand that the DNA is the blueprint for everything, and everything has its beginning here. And so they specifically chose words that have something to do with where things begin, i.e. DNA. So once again, we go back to the garden. We see that one of the chemical properties is called guanine. There's our G and our N again, guan. Remember, the I-N-E just simply means pertaining to. That is the Hebrew word for the garden, where things begin. The second one is called cytosine. Cytosine. Now, cytosine comes from the Greek word kaitos. Remember, once again, it gets softened when it comes into our English here, but it's hardened in the Greek. Kaitos, which is the Greek word for a cell. So kaitos is the Greek word for a cell. Now remember, cell in Hebrew is kala, or kela, okay, as we trace this back. And so that's where we get our English word cell from. The third one is adenine. Now, as you can see, that is from the Hebrew word Eden, because God planted a garden in Eden. And the third one's called thymine. Thymine. Thymine comes from the Hebrew word thummim. Some of you may be familiar with thummim, okay, or thummim. And it, once again, protects the original DNA. So when the DNA is in the nucleus of the cell, these are the 4 chemical properties that represent those 4 letters written on your DNA in which all life comes forth from. Now, here's what's going to happen. Remember, I said that the DNA unwinds, and you can come on back to me now, David. The DNA unwinds, and when it does and duplicates itself or himself on the messenger RNA, it's going to leave one property behind, one chemical, and it's going to pick up, it's going to take upon another chemical property is what it's going to do. And so the chemical property it's going to leave behind is the thummim. Remember, the thummim is the Hebrew word for perfect. And as a matter of fact, it's the word, for example, used of Noah when it says that Noah was perfect in his generations. Literally, it means that Noah was complete in his generations in Genesis chapter 6. So it's the Hebrew word that's translated in English as perfect. Now remember, this is going to stay behind in the nucleus of the cell where the father roots are. Remember the 2-letter combinations on the hydrogen bonds. Remember, Yeshua tells us that be ye therefore perfect, even as my Father in heaven is perfect. Remember why the DNA stays in the nucleus of the cell? To protect the perfect copy. And so the thummim is left behind, that Hebrew word that means perfect, and it takes upon another word, and that is, and go back to our slide again real quick, David. We should have hung in there a bit, and that is the word uracil. Uracil. It's going to take upon something when it goes out into the working area, if you will, out into the world, if I could say that. And it picks up a chemical property called uracil. Uracil is lights. Can you see the ur part of it? Comes from the Hebrew word or for lights. It replaces the thymine on the messenger RNA. Now come on back to me. Now, once again, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out where we're going with this. The chemical property that's left behind remains in the nucleus of the cell in order to maintain the perfect copy. But when it goes out into the area where it's going to produce the body, now it takes upon a word that means lights of the world. Now remember, Yeshua was called the light of the world. And it's no coincidence that he was called the light of the world. And so the perfect copy remains in the nucleus of the cell, and it takes upon light. Now bring us up on your screen real quick, David. John chapter 17, verse 4 and 5 tells us, Yeshua speaking, he says, I have glorified you upon the earth. I have finished the work which you gave me to do. And now, O Father, glorify thou me with your own self, with the glory which I had with thee before the world was. So what he's saying here is that in order to take upon flesh and dwell among us, he left his glory behind. He left something behind in order to what? Philippians 2, 6 and 7. Take upon the form of a servant. Philippians 2, 6 and 7. Who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, took upon the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. So Yeshua, the messenger RNA, if you will, leaves something behind in the nucleus of the cell, or on the throne. The glory, the thymine, perfect. Okay, not that Yeshua isn't perfect, don't get me wrong. But he is subject to sin like we are, yet without sin, we are told. And he takes upon something when he does that. He takes upon the form of a servant. Now come back to me, David. Now, when you see a menorah, if you've ever seen a menorah, and the description of the assemblies in the book of Revelation is a menorah. When you read about the churches in Asia, if you will, or the assemblies in Asia, in Revelation chapter, end of 1 going into chapter 2, you read that it's likened unto a 7-branch candlestick, a menorah with 7 candlesticks, and that represents the assemblies. But the one in the heart of a menorah is slightly, if you've ever seen a menorah, is slightly higher than the other 6, but all the light from the 6 comes forth from the shamash, okay, which is the center candle. Is that Shamash, okay, that center candle, is the servant candle, which gives light to all the other candles. And so it's called the servant candle. It's called the light. And the menorah is the light of the world. And so he takes this upon himself as he goes into the world. And so this is this beautiful picture, once again, of the DNA duplicating on the messenger RNA in order to form the body. Now, Michael Pittman, in the book Adam and Evolution, can you bring that up on the screen, and we'll probably close this session with it. I want you to notice what he says. He says, because of the laws of entropy, the more time you add actually lowers the possibility of chance. In other words, because things are in a corruptive state, because the nature of our Darwinistic unbelieving friends is that every time they figured out that something doesn't work in their scenario, they just lengthen the time. And so when I was a kid, the universe was about 3.5 billion years old. Now the universe is close to 20 billion years old. So in the past 40 years, the universe has aged some 16 billion years in just the short time that I've been here on Earth. And so these pea-brains think that actually adding more time increases the possibility of the chance of something occurring. But because of the laws of entropy, the known laws in the universe, because things are corrupting and not getting better, the more time you have, the more you lower the chance of the possibility of something happening just because you add more time to it. So the bottom line is, time is never any help. Time is never any help. And so what we want to do, come on back to me now, David. As we close out this session, we're going to continue with these, the fact that you can't add any more time and make things better. You'll make things actually worse. And then we're going to talk about the atoms and the molecules, those in particularly, as we close out this session, because those, once again, I'm going to submit to you, also come right from the Hebrew, the concept of atoms and molecules. I hope that you've been able to see the beauty of the Hebrew language in our Bibles in these sessions so far. So between now and the time that we see you in the next program, cling to your roots, that your days may be long, and that you will prosper in everything you set your hand to do. I hope you'll join us for this last session. I promise you'll be blessed. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.